Hey, hey, welcome to Film Fanatics, three film geeks discussing movies new and old. My name is Dan.
My name is Justin.
And I'm Joe.
This week, the biggest film of the year debuts the latest Hunger Games installment, and we also review smaller films, Whiplash, Dear White People, and Palo Alto. Our trio of older films is new classic Life of Pi, Joe's pick for old classic The Departed, and 10-time Oscar nominee Anne of the Thousand Days. And our feature looking back at the first half of the decade continues with the top 5 dramatic films since the year 2010. Now, before we get into our first movie, which is, of course, The Hunger Games, Mockingjay Part 1, just wanted to pick your guys' brains on why you think it did not do as well as the other films in the franchise. It is far and away the number one debut of the year with about $130 million, but they were expecting about $150 million, which is sort of in line with Catching Fire. Justin, what do you think of that?
For me, I think it's a matter of reviews can make or break a movie. In the case of Hunger Games Mockingjay Part 1, reviews were not great. It's also from a book that has very polarized reviews on fans, many of whom I should say, love Book 1 and Book 2, and then we get to Book 3, and then we have very mixed reactions. I can understand why, and particularly given the fact that it's a two-parter this time around, which I really wish Hollywood would get away from, because
Yeah, same.
I feel like they're not realizing that, I mean, you need to have Part 1 work on its own 2 feet before you get to Part 2.
Joe, what do you think?
Well, I can't really say much because I think I'll reveal more in my review about why I didn't think that we did so well for people. But I think more specifically, I think it is that. I think it's the Part 1, Part 2 thing. I think it really hurt the movie in terms of kind of like leading into more action, like Justin said, demanding it. I think that just kind of stretches things out a little unnecessarily. And I remember people talking about that even going into it, like, okay, like and you could say the movie ends and it's like, well, now we have to wait another year for something that may have unsatisfied a lot of audience members. Mm-hmm. But I'm not really sure. I'm not really an expert on the books, so I don't know as much. But just I think that splitting them, like that's been doing since Harry Potter, is probably something that hurt it.
Yeah. It is interesting to note this is also the first Hunger Games that was not featured in IMAX theaters, which typically does bring in about $10 million extra dollars for a big movie like this.
If I had to say, just judging by the way the film was shot, I don't think
that
it would have.
Sense.
I don't think it would have really made as much of a difference
right.
as the first two, which were brighter and showed off much more color and effects and costumes. This one was much darker, grittier, and more blasé, I might say. So
and I think that's why they chose to do it that way.
IMAX really would have not made as much of a difference. So you could see the clear black clothing so much better.
Right.
I can understand not doing that.
Yeah. All right. Well, still the biggest debut of the year. So let's see what we all thought of it here. Jennifer Lawrence returns as Katniss Everdeen in the third installment of the massively popular book and film series. The final book, as you gentlemen said, is split into 2 films. This is Part 1. It takes place shortly after the previous film, where the games have basically been dismantled thanks to Katniss and some of her friends. She finds herself in District 13, which until recently she thought no longer existed. An uprising in some of the districts towards the capital has caused tension all over Pan Am. Donald Sutherland returns as President Snow, but having veered off from the rest of Pan Am, District 13 has its own president, Alma Coin, played by new to the series Julianne Moore, who taps Katniss to be the face of the revolution, the Mockingjay. Katniss agrees because she wants to get her love Peeta, played by Josh Hutcherson, back from the capital. Most of the main cast returns for this installment, including Woody Harrelson, Liam Hemsworth, Elizabeth Banks, Stanley Tucci, and the late Philip Seymour Hoffman, whom this movie is dedicated to. For the first time, I did not read the book ahead of time for this one. I didn't even see the previews or TV interviews with the cast members. I wanted to go into this one fresh as a daisy, since the film version of Catching Fire held very little suspense for me after reading the book right before seeing it. I mean, it worked. I didn't know what to expect or even who Moore was playing until she showed up. I think this did help my enjoyment of the film, but it is still the weakest of the 3. I've been the biggest supporter of the Hunger Games series on the show, and though Part 1 is good, it's no mystery why fans were asking why split Mockingjay into 2 parts when the first half of the book is so dull, as Justin was sort of alluding to. I can see how on the page it might be boring, but when you add a visual component to it, it comes to life a little bit better. Not like in the first 2 movies, but better. The biggest issue is that the first film was so action-heavy The second film, more of a split between action and political drama, and this one acts like a cross between a war drama and a political thriller with virtually no action. Not what fans of the series, I think, signed on for. At one point, it seemed like I was watching Zero Dark Peta. I have to say, I'm glad to see that they're progressing the story and its characters, rather than just do a retread, but I'm not sure all of it works. It will be interesting to see how Part 2 continues the storyline. By itself, this may be a little bit generous, but I give Part 1 a B. Teetered on that B-, but I like that they're at least doing something different rather than repeating the same thing. Even Catching Fire, half of it was still the games, so, at least they veered away from that. Justin, let's go to you next for your thoughts on Mockingjay Part 1.
I find myself torn as to whether or not to judge this as a dull and somber adaptation of a young adult novel often criticized for the same things, or if it's just a dull and somber movie. While I can understand this issue coming from the material, that still leaves the matter of adapting it to the screen to make it work, which the film suffers from, same as the other entries in the Hunger Games series. Lawrence continues her charisma as Katniss, but instead of letting the other actors that have made up the best components of the last two movies, such as Woody Harrelson, they largely get kicked to the wayside to introduce new characters, such as Julianne Moore, who makes an already slow movie even slower. Along the way, there are a few skirmishes to try and keep things livelier, which are fun, but given that most of these don't feature series favorites, it comes across as lacking. The Hunger Games Mockingjay Part 1 is yet another two-part finale that seems to do little more in the first installment than tease the more action-driven second part, and I let it barely get away with a B-.
It's actually better than I thought from you, Justin. You're usually the biggest critic of these films on the show. Joe, what did you think of Part 1?
I pretty much agree with both your guys' points, actually. When it comes to Hunger Games, I've always tried to kind of give the movies the benefit of a doubt because I'm not really a big fan of them. I don't really think they're inherently bad stories, but I'm just not into them. But I do like the world, and the thing I like the most about the Hunger Games that interests me is just the primary theme of how media is a big component of everything, and just the whole political aspect of it. And I like seeing the Capitol. I like the awesome costumes and whatnot. I think that adds something really interesting to kind of make this film franchise stand out among other similar stories. Mm-hmm. And one of the problems I had with Catching Fire is that even though I thought that, like this film, it progressed the story, it was still basically a retread of the first movie, which I thought was kind of lazy. This one is much less of a retread, but it's also kind of boring. In all honesty, I think the direction they took the characters does kind of work, but a lot of them do get pushed to the side. Like, Haymitch is probably one of the best characters, with, Harrelson, of course, but really minor part, and the film kind of meanders a lot, and some of the drama doesn't work for me, and maybe this is a translation problem between the movie to the book, and I've noticed it in all the movies, but it was much worse in this one. I don't know if it's the performances or the way they're writing some of the dialogue or just the focus, but I think the coolest aspect is the political aspect, and they're driving this romance love triangle thing like it's so important, and we're supposed to get behind it, and we're supposed to care because Katniss cares about Peeta. But I still am not sold that they care about each other that much. Maybe it was from the previous movies, but it did not have as much emotional resonance to me. It also doesn't help that there were some actions that were taken from, I think, just a logical standpoint that didn't make any sense. I thought maybe that was just to add more drama. Like, I liked the ending of the movie. Mm-hmm. I thought that it did leave some tension. But how they got there, I thought was honestly kind of stupid. And I don't quite understand Snow's character anymore, because he seems...
I never did.
Yeah, I was going to say that's always been one of Justin's arguments.
And I'm with Justin's points before. I did notice to some degree it makes sense, but this one is the worst. Like, it really is noticeable for me this time because, okay, I get the idea of the symbol of the Mockingjay and how people can use this person as a figurehead. I get that. But to put the figurehead and try to make her more of an actual combat individual, it doesn't really make sense in standard of the story, like from an actual military standpoint, really. So I think they kind of play with that a little too much. And the fact that Snow, it just seems so obsessed with her. Like, he's got this evil, like he's her arch enemy, and he just lives to see her suffer. She should not be your main priority right now.
I mean, she did kind of ruin everything that they held dear in the Capitol.
But that's the thing. He should, by doing this, he's actually giving her more power.
Yeah.
By focusing on it. If he just dissuades it and tried to cut her off, it would make more sense. So I just felt like it seems kind of one-dimensional, to be honest. And maybe that's because, like a lot of the other characters, we don't really get to see much more of insight to his character.
He's just a ridiculously inconsistent villain.
I didn't think it was that bad in the previous movies, but I'm beginning to see that his motivations do jump radically each movie. So that is starting to get annoying. But the performances were good, and like I said, from a story point, it does kind of work. So I will be a little gracious. I'm going to give this one a B-. But it's mostly just because I liked the cast and I liked some of the direction they took the characters. But I'll be honest, it was bordering on C+ territory because some parts of the movie were just boring. In all honesty, they just meandered.
Maybe I'm just really into the series. I mean, I loved the first movie. I thought Catching Fire was a disappointment from that standpoint. But I have to say, I've never found any of the movies to be boring, long in the tooth, pacing issues. For me, I don't see it.
Well, to be fair, I think the movie would have actually functioned much better if they had made it like a 3-hour epic, and I just cram everything in there.
I think that's probably true.
Instead of like making it a 2-hour movie that feels a little too short, and certain things feel rushed, and certain scenes literally nothing happens. Like we have another scene where Katniss is out in the woods crying, and I mean, didn't we kind of do this in the last movie with the hunting again?
You have to admit, though, I didn't think clearly the romance is the worst part of the series. I agree with that. But I didn't think it was really that present here. Yeah, she wanted to get Peeta back, but it wasn't necessarily on a boyfriend level.
Dan, maybe, but I don't know, honestly, because I haven't read the books. But based upon what I have seen and what I do know about it, it is supposed to be like a love triangle.
Yes.
And therefore, if it's supposed to be love triangle, it's romantic in some sense. And I think we're supposed to sense that she does care about him, kind of, I think. But then again,
which goes into hole number 2 for me. Both love interests aren't that great.
That's another problem, actually, I didn't really address. Peeta, I don't really get why she's into him at all. And the other guy, what's his name?
Gale.
Gale. I hate him. I hate him so much. He's boring. He's mean. He's inconsistent.
Well, that's why everyone wants her to be with Peeta. No one, it's not like a Team Edward, Team Jacob kind of thing like Twilight.
But
nobody really wants her to be with Gale.
But as you just said, I don't think it's really that established that she's in love with him. So, and she makes it like Peeta's more important than everything.
Well,
and I'm like, no, it shouldn't be. Julianne Moore's right.
Right.
But then again, okay, it's supposed to be the romance, fine. But I don't sense that. I feel like that is made to be the center of the story, and it's not. And if it's not going to be, just ignore it.
I think it's her motivator in this installment, but I don't think it's the center of the story. It's what gets her to agree to be the Mockingjay, but I don't think it's at the center of the story. Of all 3 of the movies, I think her conflict between who she's in love with is just not even really discussed that much.
Which I guess bugs me, because that is her motivation, you're right. But if it's her primary motivation of the main character to keep the plot moving forward, we should focus more on it.
You'd think.
I would think. And I'm fine with that. I'm fine with good romance in movies. It's not that common in movies like these, but why not? Let's actually play off that love triangle and do it much better than Twilight. And instead, sadly, Twilight, while badly written, does have a better defined love triangle. Because they spend time on it. So you could argue whether or not that's as important, maybe not, but like I said, if I'm supposed to care and get behind it, I just haven't been sold on it that much in these movies.
Okay.
Especially in this one. I don't know. Maybe just because we just didn't get to spend enough time with any of them, it was so spread out.
Well, and I think for a movie that does run a good 2 hours, you guys are right. We don't necessarily see a lot of our old favorites that much. I love the Effie Trinket character. She's in maybe 3 scenes here.
Well, actually,
we spend a lot more time with Julianne Moore and Philip Seymour Hoffman.
It's actually interesting you point that out. I may have mentioned this before. Did I ever tell you Effie is actually my favorite character in the Hunger Games series?
I think you have, yes.
No, I actually do like her. Yeah. And of the character growth I've seen so far, she's the best. I actually like the way her character grows.
She has a nice turn in this of the downtrodden, former Capitol person.
Yeah.
Definitely.
But we don't see her that much. It's true. All right, well, we will see in about a year's time how Part 2, the final chapter in the Hunger Games series, grabs us. Hopefully a little bit better than this one.
And hey, if you've read the books, then you're already laughing about it.
Yeah, that's true. All right, our next film is Whiplash, and Justin's got that one.
Andrew, played by Miles Teller, is a talented young drummer, seemingly willing to stop at nothing to become successful, even at the cost of his own health. His talents draw the attention of merciless music instructor Professor Fletcher, played by J.K. Simmons, who pushes Andrew well beyond his limits. I admit I may be guilty of bias in this review, but having played band for about a decade in my public school career, it's remarkable how chillingly authentic Whiplash covers this kind of intensity. Simmons plays Fletcher like a hungry tiger, seeking out innocent victims who had a bad luck of the draw to get the best out of them by any means necessary. He makes the audience feel their suffering, and in mere seconds, Simmons seems as if he's been interrogating them for hours with no chance of escape. It's disturbing to watch, and likely to anger any good-hearted human being, but that's what makes Whiplash near perfect. Its chaotic, take-no-prisoners atmosphere. The moments between the dedicated Teller, who while filming played so furiously like his character that some of the blood seen while he's playing is actually real, and Simmons is absolutely electric, getting straight to the core of each character without a moment to lose. Unfortunately, much of the outside plots are not as engaging, and sometimes the film does get a little predictable, and in one situation, completely outrageous, but these are minimal and get right back into the deeper story. At the moment, Whiplash gets an A, but I could see upon another viewing easily bumping it up to an A+.
Joe, how about you?
I pretty much would agree with everything Justin said. I think that this movie just is really tight. It has a really solid direction. It knows the story it wants to tell. It doesn't stray too far off from it. It has one singular purpose, and it has to show that initial drive that Teller's character has to really be the best that he can be, and show Simmons as being the counteract between that. And really, just seeing these two actors play off each other, there's just so much talent in the room every time. And I think electric is a perfect word for it, Justin. Really, there's just... everything is just so crisp and so strangely real, despite the harshness of it. And I think that really speaks to it. It does seem like a very believable story, and it's well shot. And I have to speak, the actual music that is produced is fantastic. I think if you're a music lover, especially of jazz and drum-focused stuff particularly, I think that you'll really love this movie just for that. It probably speaks to a lot of authentic stories, really, in regards to that in real life. I actually would have to disagree with you a little bit, Justin, that the side stories were bad.
Not necessarily bad, just not as engaging as the interplay between Teller and Simmons.
Well, I can't really disagree with that, but I guess I looked at it like they weren't really side stories. They were just kind of snippets to feed the main story. I considered it all one big story. Like, if you're saying, for instance, the scenes with his dad or with his girlfriend, I think those scenes were essential. I think you really needed them, and I think that they were perfectly timed for that, because
I'm not saying that they're not essential. I'm just saying I think there are ways to give them more punch.
Well, I really think like we only spent a certain amount of time outside of the drumming, but I felt that we got just enough in those moments to learn a lot more about these characters and what motivates them, and I thought it was incredibly powerful. Like there's a scene with his girlfriend that's extremely good, with his family at the dinner table. These were amazing, but actually that's kind of what leads to the one issue that keeps this movie from being perfect for me, is that from a moral standpoint, I think it made me feel a little uncomfortable. And I think that's the point. It actually really does speak to a really poignant question about how far you're willing to take something. Can you really achieve greatness and still lead a normal life and be like a decent human being? I personally think so. I've seen it done all the time. But this movie seems to be suggesting that to be the best, you have to make sacrifices, which you do. But I think it's a little extreme in that viewpoint. I think that might not necessarily have been the best way to perceive that. Mm-hmm. But with the exception of that minor aspect, I think it's a fantastic movie, and I leave it with an A as well.
Well, gentlemen, I'm just going to say it. I'm sick of seeing J.K. Simmons in supporting roles. He is one of the most likable, recognizable, seasoned actors around, and finally, in Whiplash, he is front and center, or at least equal with Teller. Not only that, but he's one of the most unlikable characters of the year and plays it perfectly unapologetic. It is very uncomfortable in many scenes in this movie. Teller, for his part, is finally also able to spread his wings a bit. I loved him in The Spectacular Now, but when his characters in Divergent, That Awkward Moment, 21 and Over, and Project X were all basically the same, I wondered if he had more in him. Like his character in Whiplash, Teller pulls out everything he has and lays it on the table, almost screaming at us to take notice as loudly as his character's drum kit. I think we all did take notice of that here.
Oh, yeah.
And in most ways, this film can even be taken out of the music world and applied to almost anything that demands focus and discipline. Mm-hmm. Sports, obviously, but it goes even broader than that. Anything. So anybody can relate. Becoming a doctor, climbing up the social ladder, anything. And that is one of Whiplash's many strengths. I echo you, gentlemen, and give it an A as well.
But I have to ask, why not an A+?
To be honest, I'm a little between the both of you on the side character business.
Okay.
I thought the girlfriend stuff was nice. How necessary was it? I don't know. The stuff with his dad and the family, I loved. Joe, I think you seem to like all of those scenes, more than us.
Yeah.
I didn't dislike the scenes with the girl because obviously
I thought
they're minimal.
Volumes.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I just didn't like the way that they were necessarily done.
The resolution?
Well, no, actually, the resolution was my favorite part.
Okay.
But
a little more?
Maybe another date with her. Maybe build the relationship a little bit before completely tearing it apart.
I could see a scene or two more.
If you're going to do that.
Yeah.
I thought the stuff with the dad was just enough. I really like Paul Reiser. I thought he did a great job here as the father. And I think that they used him the correct amount. But you're right, Joe. All of these scenes are important for his character, and his character's growth.
Like, I wouldn't have taken anything away, personally.
Okay.
But I do have to echo you, though. I'm glad you brought up the point about Simmons, because I think he's very well known and liked, but it's kind of underrated.
Well, because you see him in so many things, but he is a classic character actor. I don't think... if you asked 100 people, 90 of them, I don't think would know his name.
Well, you pulled up a picture of J. Jonah Jameson, they'd probably be able to pick
exactly.
him out.
They would say, oh, yeah, that's the guy from Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Or Juno, or Extract, or, 100 other things.
The cool thing about him is that he also has range, and he's not afraid to dip into anything. I mean, Actually, it's funny. The guy's got a lot of voice work, too. He was a bad guy on Justice League.
Yep.
He's got a great voice. That's not surprising.
Great voice. So I mean, the guy's in a lot of things, and I don't think he gets enough credit. And I think here he might actually get maybe a nod.
Oh, at this point,
I would love to see that. But yeah, I agree that the music in this is just top notch. I mean, these are I don't know what their acting chops are, but these are real, true session musicians, obviously that know their stuff. And the theater that we see these more independent movies at doesn't have the best soundproofing, and they're also running Birdman in the next theater. So it was so interesting to hear the Birdman drum score, in quieter scenes of Whiplash. It's like, oh, okay, they're doing the whole drum thing, over top of each other.
Strangely, also is kind of present in Dear White People.
That's true. The next movie we're going to talk about, there's a bit of an underlying drum theme as well.
It's just interesting, yeah.
Well, let's move into that. As you mentioned it, Joe, you're going to tell us here about Dear White People.
It's an American satirical drama film written and directed by Justin Simien. It stars Tyler James Williams as Lionel, the social outcast, Dennis Haysbert as the Dean of Students, and Tessa Thompson as Sam White.
No irony there.
A young revolutionary and head of a historically black frat house, and the host of the borderline racist radio show, Dear White People. The story is of 4 African-American students at this fictional Ivy League college, Winchester University, where a riot breaks out over a popular African-American, air quotes, themed party thrown by white students. The film explores these interactions between the students in the events leading up to the riot. The story focuses on concepts regarding racial and cultural identity, racial stereotyping, and the role media plays on these concepts. The film has many relevant ideas and often brings effective humor to punctuate them. It also brings significant talent to the table that makes these characters seem more human and less like politically charged mouthpieces. Sometimes the film seems to think it's a bit smarter than it really is. However, since it was presented as a satire, this can mostly be forgiven. Interestingly, though, the film doesn't really seem like a satire, at least to me, but rather a drama with comedic satire elements. This means while the jokes often work, the dramatic components sometimes suffer. This doesn't help that the characters are mostly stereotypes that are given more depth and complexity as the story unfolds. The problem is that these ideas aren't explored that well in one of the main characters, Sam. Sure, we learn something about her that makes her more interesting, though I would argue it's a bit obvious, and the details are never really explained. Where the movie really shines, though, is with Lionel, who was played by Williams, who is the shy, geeky black kid who doesn't fit in with any group. It is with his story that the main theme is best executed, that all of these people are perhaps going too far, and that people should be judged on an individual basis. Even his character had issues, but they were mostly minor. In short, Dear White People is funny, smart, and well performed, but still suffers slightly from tonal focus and character development. I leave it with a B+.
Justin, what'd you think?
When I first watched the trailer for this film, I found myself annoyed. Certainly I thought I understood what it was trying to convey, but I still considered it a case of reversed racism with a sense of humor. However, upon seeing the film, I now view it as the exact opposite. While I think Dear White People is a bit too on the nose at the start, trying less to tell a story and going further with social satire, once it settles down and actually lets its characters do the talking, there's a wealth of material to discuss. Thompson has more than a little bite to her character, and the way she shakes things up with a deadpan sense of humor is clever. However, the problem with her character comes from the decision to add a romantic subplot into the narrative. This is largely stop and start, and ultimately plays out in a mostly predictable way. That said, these are often interspersed with the stories of other characters, like Lionel, who get increasingly more interesting as the film goes along. Particularly in the climactic rebellion that, thanks to the end credits, has more truth to it than the audience may want to admit. Overall, Dear White People is a fun social satire that, if it had put more effort into the characters earlier, it might have been one of the most poignant movies of this decade, and I give it a B+.
Yeah, I'm with you, Justin. I was on the fence about this one for like the first half hour. It seemed to lack focus, was trying way too hard to be edgy, and the references, too, were instantly repetitive. We get it. Tyler Perry makes bad movies. You use that one like 3 times. Why reference Lisa Bonet and then her Cosby spinoff, A Different World, within 10 minutes of each other? It lacked punch, lacked wit, and then as the characters get more defined, the cleverness picks up and everything else picks up with it. Williams, already great at cross-culture satire in his starring role as young Chris Rock in Everybody Hates Chris, his comic timing and delivery is perfect for this role, and I thought Thompson did a great job as well. I do agree that the romance is probably the weakest element of the film. It's very scattershot. You know, the rest of the movie is all about the social commentary. We don't really get a lot of commentary from the romance part. But it ends up being a really fun movie. I just wish it started that way as well. I give it a B.
Oh.
Joe, did you feel that the beginning sort of lacked a little bit of something that picked up, or did you kind of like it all the way through?
I kind of liked it at the beginning. I thought it wasn't taking itself very seriously. It was having fun. So I didn't really know where it was going at first. So I was a bit hesitant. I think, like you said, once the characters are a little better defined, it does get a little more structured. But at the beginning, I'll be honest, I had no idea what it was about or where it was going. It's like, here's this person, here's a joke, here's the white people, haha. I don't know. I don't know. I don't really think I disliked it at the beginning or I felt it was too modeled. I was just not sure where it was going.
I think that was kind of my issue with it, is that it did seem like set up joke,
vignette.
Racist, vignette.
Yeah.
And it's like, the story really took a little time to evolve. Maybe it would have helped if they didn't do all of the graphics between each scene, you know, saying like, oh, this is the whatever house, and they do this, you know. That to me seemed
unnecessary.
Unnecessary, yeah.
Well, I mean, for me, it was more or less a matter of like, okay, you're showing these like, oh, look how predominantly white they are. Don't just say, oh yes, they're obnoxiously white.
Show us
how they're being complete jerks.
Mm-hmm. And they do later.
Right, they do later.
Wouldn't it have been great to like cut to the chase and instead of like just blatantly saying, oh yes, they're bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would have been a little more interesting to do it that way. Trust the audience to get it, I guess. But I don't know. I mean, I kind of liked what they were going for. They were trying to be kind of cute, kind of edgy, as you'd say. They were just trying to add their own little spicy bite to it, just being satirical and kind of have that framing device like it's a yearbook, kind of like a historical account. So I mean, I don't know. I think if it wasn't there, I think it would have had a little less stylistically, but maybe narratively it would have been stronger. I didn't really mind either way, to be completely honest. So,
what did you guys think of the reality show side plot?
Interesting, but not quite as well developed as it could have been.
Yeah.
Much like Lord of the Rings, I felt like this one ended like a bunch of different times, and I felt the one they finally chose to end on to wrap up the reality show subplot, it was nice, but I kind of wish we had gotten to it earlier so we could have had a better ending.
You know what? I think they decided to go with that ending because it had the funniest punch.
Yeah,
but it wasn't.
I agree.
It wasn't the ending to the main story, though. Exactly. So
well, but you know what? I think there is a case where the graphic actually helped because it was an epilogue, and they titled it as such. It wasn't really part of the main story.
It's true.
You're right. It was just a little epilogue-y joke to punch it up at the end.
It's funny, but I don't know if it was necessarily the best actual ending they could have gone with. Because, I mean, I thought it was funny, but I thought it was a strange place to end, personally. Like, something was a little off about the ending to me.
So would you have liked it more as a post-credit sequence?
You know, yes, actually.
Okay.
Had they actually taken the epilogue to resolve maybe a little bit more about where the characters went, maybe, and then kind of like have it go halfway through the credits, find out what happens with the resolution with Haysbert and the president. Right. That it was funny.
Behind that.
I was cool with it, but I didn't know if it was necessarily the best ending they could have gone with.
I'd agree.
All right, well, that is it for our brand new releases. Let's go into our home media moment now, and Justin's going to tell us about Palo Alto.
Well, please tell me. Please enlighten me, seriously. Help me out. Help me out.
Fun activity, listeners. Watch this movie and find out how to summarize it in 3 sentences or less.
Good luck.
April, played by Emma Roberts, is a shy high school soccer player torn between feelings for her crush Teddy, played by Jack Kilmer, and the possibility of a relationship with her coach, Mr. B, played by James Franco. Across several vignettes, Palo Alto explores high school life, from April's struggles to fit in, the adventures of a promiscuous girl named Emily, played by Zoe Levin, and Teddy's own downward spiral hanging out with his stoner best friend Fred, played by Nat Wolff. If ever there was a venue that nearly begs to tell a connected narrative in vignettes, it would probably be high school. There's quite a bit going on, and with many different characters from a variety of different backgrounds, Palo Alto really could have been something. It's something, alright, but while after viewing it the first time, I'm still not entirely certain what that is. While no one really turns in an off performance, although Wolff tries a little too hard to be a junkie, the bulk of the characters just aren't that interesting. April's story, while engaging, is often predictable, Emily's is just repetitive, and together Teddy and Fred don't really have much more going on than a pitiful attempt to throw in an existential discussion while under the influence. That said, Teddy's story on his own is actually fairly interesting, but it's not too long before the film reintroduces Fred again, and it's back to the same thing. Honestly, there are moments of promise in each story, but once it seems like it's heading towards something fairly compelling, the story focuses on one of the other characters and doesn't return for a good while. Palo Alto is not an awful film, it's just not quite sure of what it's trying to do and how to do it, and I give it a C+.
Right from the start, this movie seemed in tone, look, subject matter, and direction as a Sofia Coppola movie. And barring Lost in Translation, that is not a good thing. So when the credits rolled at the end and the first one was directed by Gia Coppola, it all made sense to me. No. The other thing that struck me is, why is Franco even in this movie? His character adds very little, could have been played by anyone. Then the second credit that came up at the end was, based on Palo Alto stories by James Franco. So that solved that one. Basically, this movie is just an irritating vanity project. It's bland, and other than the lead character, nobody is likable or interesting. I mean, he's a cute dude, but a merely okay actor. Emma Roberts' character is okay, but better written in about 50 other movies. Palo Alto is not terrible, it just has nothing to say, and it's a C- for me. Joe?
I'm really torn about this one. On one hand, I think that, thematically speaking, I think it does capture high school life fairly well. I felt like these characters...
Fairly.
Kind of.
Like I felt like...
It's not horrible.
The atmosphere did seem like it probably spoke to a lot of people's experiences generally. Mm-hmm. I think I could see some people relating in those situations. So I liked that aspect of it. I thought that was fairly genuine. That's about where the positives end, though. The movie takes its time, and at first I thought it was fine. But the problem... The movie has two major issues, which you both brought up. First of all, the movie has no idea what it wants to do. It doesn't really do anything. It doesn't really have a plot. It just has... almost like vignettes, but they don't really go anywhere. There isn't really a conclusion. Maybe that was the point. I don't know. But literally, the progression for the characters is practically non-existent, and that is a problem. It just doesn't seem like this movie has anything really better to say that most movies like it have said before that much better. And secondly, the characters are either uninteresting or just unlikable. I mean, really, there's a difference between being an angsty teenager and just being, quite frankly, dislikable person. I didn't like most of the characters in this movie. The main character, Teddy, I actually did think, even though I didn't really always like him, I thought that he was trying to redeem himself. And like you said, once Fred comes back, it's like, we're just back to this again.
I know.
And I'm just like, and what a dislikable, like, just, I don't know. And that's the problem. If a movie doesn't have any characters you can really get behind and it doesn't really have a story that's progressing, it's a pretty mixed bag. I'm actually in between you guys. I'm going to give this one a C.
Okay.
I mean, I did like the general idea, and I liked the way it was shot, and I thought the performances were decent, but the story had no real direction, and the characters weren't likable or interesting or well defined. So I wouldn't really recommend it to anybody. It doesn't.
No, I would never recommend this movie.
Stylistically, it doesn't really have much to.
I really like the Teddy character.
Yeah,
and I wish that they had done something more with it, like the scenes with him at the library.
Yeah,
or getting in trouble with his. Community service hours officer or whatever.
Yeah.
Good
scene.
That was interesting, and it was character development, but then
it ends in like 5 minutes.
Justin said, then we bring somebody else back in that's like, oh, this again?
I mean, maybe
this is awful.
I think what they were trying to imply is like they just keep falling into the same patterns and it was cyclical behavior.
Right.
Which I guess makes sense, but maybe there was just a better way they could have done it, maybe fleshed it out, maybe focused on one character more, because that's really Teddy's storyline was the most memorable to me.
Yeah, definitely.
Like April's like I know there was a conflict there, and I wanted to care, but I was like, okay, you're either going to sleep with him or you're not. I think you don't want to, so just end it.
Yeah.
Okay, that story's over. Like I didn't really feel like that was. I felt like there was more conflict built up by what other people were saying. Like, oh, you should sleep with James Franco. I'm not really into him. Like, well, you're not.
Right.
You clearly said that. I don't know. Yeah, I guess it's a vanity project. I don't really mind that he was in it. But you're right. He could have been played by anyone.
Right.
But I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's a vanity project because he obviously wrote the stories that the movie's based on.
Is he friends with the Coppolas, I guess?
I guess. I don't know.
Because there's like, hey, I mean, he's got a lot of...
I'm sick of the Coppola family, to be honest. Francis Ford aside,
Draw the line.
Yeah, Lost in Translation's good. I mean, Joe, I know you're a huge fan, but like the Bling Ring was horrible.
Well, to be fair,
just everything else I've seen from them.
I mean, it's possible.
And Nicolas Cage is a Coppola, so it's like there's another one.
Well, I don't know. There's talent in there somewhere, obviously. But to be fair, I think that might be the only Sofia Coppola movie I've seen.
Okay,
maybe
that's the best one.
Well, it was very good.
Yeah,
but she's not much of an actress. I know that.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Godfather 3.
I've heard that. I never saw Godfather 3, but I have heard that.
I mean, she was okay, but she was mostly balanced out by the great...
Sam Rockwell's in that movie?
That's a great person.
Oh,
he had a
the
beard.
Great.
The Great.
Right, Ray Fiennes.
Andy Garcia.
Damn it, Andy Garcia.
Most of her scenes were with him, so I think
we like a lot of people. It's hard to.
Yeah, he was the first one that was great on Film Fanatics.
That is true. That is true. The great Andy Garcia.
But yeah, I think he kind of helped her up.
Okay.
But as an individual actress, that I don't know. So who's Gia?
I don't know. Sister, I guess.
Niece, cousin.
I was so unenthralled with this movie, I didn't even care to look it up.
I was like, well, like
she's
I said,
some relation.
I think I would say there's potential in this movie somewhere, but
where it is, we're not quite sure.
It's just pretty underwhelming for the most part, I would say.
It is. And this is what angers me about movies like this. And I don't know if it's because of the Coppola family, but they seem to be largely critic-proof. I mean, this movie is like in the mid-70s on Rotten Tomatoes, and so was The Bling Ring. And I don't get it. I haven't met one person that likes either of those movies.
Well, you're probably right. I mean, you've got the Coppolas. It's like people might cut them a little slack.
It's like how Rolling Stone gives every Bob Dylan album 5 stars. Even in 2012, it's like, okay,
I don't know if he's quite as relevant as he used to be.
Right. All right, well, let's move into our top 5. We've been doing this series, sort of wrapping up the first half of the decade, and we have a few different dramatic films on the show this week. Whiplash is one of them. We'll talk about Life of Pi coming up. So we're going to do the top 5 drama films from 2010 through the present. And I'll start this one. My number 5 is Mud. This was my favorite film of all of last year. Matthew McConaughey recently revealed in an interview promoting Interstellar.
Yep.
Promoting Interstellar, that his favorite movie that he's ever done is Mud. It's certainly my favorite of his performances, one of the greatest coming-of-age stories I've seen probably ever. And, Reese Witherspoon gives a solid dramatic performance as well. Hopefully, a sign of things to come in Wild coming out later.
Definitely.
My number 4 is The Descendants, from the great George Clooney. Who's the director we always talk about? Yeah, the Alexander Payne collection. One of our favorite people to talk about on this show.
You've seen most of his movies already.
Yeah, we've reviewed almost all of his movies on the show in the short year that we've been on the air. But The Descendants is, for me, just the best. It's got a great story, one where the book and the film are equally great, and some really great performances from more underrated performers and sometimes more comedic performers like Judy Greer. My number 3 is Calvary, one that we talked about earlier in the summer of this year. Just a fantastic movie. I would not be surprised if this was in my top 2 or 3 come the end of 2014. Brendan Gleeson is a firecracker in this movie and just is so powerful as the movie is on the whole. And my number 2 is Black Swan. This one is the one on my list that definitely delves into the most other territory. It's a little bit of a thriller, but by and large, it's a drama, I think, first and foremost. And the chemistry between Natalie Portman and the director is great. And here again, some great side performances. Winona Ryder, who, other than Star Trek, we hadn't seen in a long time do something of note, gives a great performance here. And Black Swan is one of the most brilliant movies, certainly, of the last few years. Joe, let's go to you next.
All right. I want to say this is probably the hardest one for me, actually, because
Justin said that earlier.
Really?
Yeah, he texted me about it.
This was tough.
Well, that's, I think, drama, I think, is one of the more broader types of films. Like, and I when I was doing my list, you might notice there were some ones that we talked about within the last 6 months, last year, that are going to be absent from it.
Okay.
But I think that's mostly because I was trying to limit it to movies I thought that were primarily dramatic. Well, number 5, I think you'll be happy about this one, Dan. It's actually Mud.
Oh, great.
Yeah, because Mud really stands out for me. It's definitely one of the better McConaughey movies that's come out recently, and just a really, really good drama. I think it kind of did sit a little more tightly on the line with thriller, but it still, I think overall, it definitely had some of the best cinematography I've seen too. Mm-hmm. Number 4 is Llewyn Davis, actually, in some ways. I mean, was I think a really good movie. I think it did not get anywhere near the credit it deserved to have gotten, but just really fantastic from Oscar Isaac, and just really, really good story.
There's another one with great music too.
Fantastic music. Number 3 is Boyhood. Just fantastic in terms of scope. I mean, really, there's nothing quite like it. I think it just in terms of coming of age. I don't know if it could get much better than that, at least not for that particular style of filmmaking. Number 2 is another McConaughey. It's actually Dallas Buyers Club. I mean, talk about effective. Talk about just tear-jerking, but just real human strength of endurance there. And Jared Leto, another great performance. Really, really amazing movie.
All great movies on your list, and ones that I think all of us graded very highly. Justin, how about for you?
Okay, well, to kick this off on a note, number 5, Before Midnight. The latest entry and my personal favorite of the series. Leads and director all wrote the script, and there's not too many films that can be said about. And they've said the series is alive and well, and I hope part 4 comes out sometime in my lifetime. Number 4 is The Artist. I'm a little bit biased here. I have a massive love for silent film, so I thought this was a very well done movie. It tells an ironic tale about one of the darkest moments in Hollywood history, but chooses to face it with charm and a sense of humor. Number 3 is Boyhood. Almost unbelievable accomplishment. It told a coherent narrative over 20 years, and the only reason this isn't higher is I called into question if the technical aspects are undermining the dramatic components, which is why I was a little bit uncomfortable about making it my number 2 or my number 1. And my number 2, Joe, I think you'll like this, is Inside Llewyn Davis. Just an absolute testament to the talent of the Coen brothers. Isaac completely blew me away, and the music is still in my head. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. What on earth was the Academy thinking?
Yeah, Boyhood is great. It does not appear on my list for sort of those reasons, Justin. Obviously, from a technical standpoint, I think I appreciated it more than my own personal enjoyment of it. And that's sort of what these top 5 lists are more about. Which is why, I mean, for you and your artist bias, why not? It's top 5.
Yeah, fair enough.
Which might factor into my number 1, The Perks. Great movie. No, the Perks of Being a Wallflower is easily the best book-to-film adaptation I've ever seen. Great performances, very realistic. What more is there to say? It's just one of the best coming-of-age films ever. Joe?
Before I reveal my number 1, I actually wanted to give a couple honorable mentions because it was such a tough list. Now, this one didn't enter my top 5 just because, like one of our recent videos, I wasn't sure if it fit quite into comedy or drama because it's kind of both. I think it's more drama, so I was considering Moonrise Kingdom because it was pretty fantastic. I thought it was more drama, but I left it off because it's kind of both. And also Perks of Being a Wallflower. I really consider that for number 5. That was an excellent movie. But my number 1 is something you guys showed to me. It's 50-50.
Wow.
This movie really resonated with me.
That is a great movie.
Like, I remember wanting to see it when it came out. I missed it, and I got to see it when you guys introduced it to me. And just for Joseph Gordon-Levitt, I mean, wow, what a powerful performance. And Seth Rogen, like, finally kind of breaking away from just the silly comedy, like, and just being genuinely effective.
Yeah.
Like, I thought it was really quite excellent from him. I mean, it's my favorite Rogen performance to date, and just
I would agree with that.
Really big surprise. Movie still resonates with me. It's really good. It's probably one of the better Film Fanatics experiences I can remember. Like, just it really sticks with me. So
cool.
That's my favorite dramatic of the last 5 years.
Awesome. Great choice. That really is one that is like, you could argue that has comedic elements. I would say it's more of a drama, though.
Definitely.
Like August Osage County. You
yeah.
know, it's got some comedic elements in it, but the larger story is very dramatic.
I'd say
they're
it's
usually feeding off that.
Right.
The comedy is kind of like laugh because it's such a sad situation.
Yeah.
Like the infamous Rogen meltdown.
The Rogen meltdown.
Rogen meltdown. The first time Joseph Gordon-Levitt gets high in the hospital. These are some comedic moments, but
you need them.
You need them, well, and that's sort of how his Gordon-Levitt's character sort of thrived, was sort of looking at the comedic side of things.
And it was kind of another way of kind of going through the stages of grief.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, unfortunately, 50-50 we watched for New Classic before there was a show. We ran New Classics for about 3 months before a show existed, and that was one of them. So we never really got to talk about it here on the show. So that's a great choice, Joe.
Number 1 for me is, and I think you guys are going to be shocked by this, Birdman.
Whoa.
Wow, a week after the fact.
Hey.
Just thought it was a ridiculously original film. Keaton's performance was an absolutely warm welcome back after decades away from the spotlight. And seemingly long takes for me just really helped make the audience part of the story. It brought a lot of parallels for me with Alfred Hitchcock's Rope.
I actually thought about it, but we kind of just saw it, so I want to think about it for a while. And also, I was also kind of, I'd like to think of it as a drama, but I guess I don't know if it was more of a comedy. I thought it was tougher to classify that one.
I don't know. I think it's mostly a drama. I mean, there are funny moments.
I'm okay with it, but I think it's tough because I thought it was pretty well balanced between the two.
Yeah, I mean,
dramedies are always hard.
I don't think I would argue either point. If I were to say, I would probably classify it as a comedy, but it certainly has dramatic elements, and a lot of them.
It's pretty 50-50.
Yeah, so it's 50-50. Another great reference to that movie.
Actually, it was kind of unintentional, but...
Well, that is sort of, I would say, maybe why the drama list is the hardest, because a lot of these movies are also something else.
It's another reason I left Calvary off, because I thought...
Calvary, we talked long and hard on this show about...
Drama,
Is
comedy,
it a black comedy?
thriller,
is it a
mystery,
drama? Right.
It's hard to classify something.
It is. All right, well, now we will move on to our triple feature of older films, and we kick that off with New Classic Life of Pi. Based on the popular novel by Jan Martel, this 2012 Oscar-winning film, was adapted for the screen by David Magee and directed by Ang Lee, who took home the Best Director prize that year. It is largely a one-man show, with Suraj Sharma as Pai Patel, a teenager whose family perishes as their ship to Canada hits a bad storm, and Pai makes his way onto a lifeboat along with some animals his family owned, like a zebra and a hyena, all of which die quickly, except for a Bengal tiger. The story is told in flashbacks to a writer by the adult Pai, played by Irfan Khan. Largely thought to be an unfilmable book, Lee turns that notion on its head and creates some of the most visually striking scenes of this decade, with or without the 3D. Though, to be fair, it was some of the best 3D I've ever seen. But even on the small screen, the visuals are breathtaking and the story holds up. It's not without its flaws, it's got pacing issues, and I'm not sure if it has anything to say by way of a lesson or a moral, and the adult Pai character seems to really want to show us something in that regard, and I don't think does. But it's still a great film that holds up, even for my third viewing, and I give it an A-. Joe?
I'm pretty much on the same page with you, Dan. I think that this one really has a lot to say visually. I was wondering, seeing on the small screen, how much it was going to affect it, but in terms of visuals, I think it is quite excellent, quite breathtaking in a lot of ways. I do agree, though, it does have some significant pacing issues at certain points. Mm-hmm. And in way of a moral, I think that's always been one of my biggest problems with the movie, is that in terms of philosophically what it's trying to say, I'm not entirely sure. And I think that ambiguousness is, I don't know if it's intentional or if it's just kind of awkwardly done. So I think that does kind of hurt the conclusion of the film. But overall, I think that the primary performance is still pretty good, and the story itself, for the most part, holds up. I think there are definitely some interesting parts that will be remembered for certain. And I actually give it an A- as well.
Justin, how about you?
I have a great deal of respect for Ang Lee in adapting this to the screen, particularly in the use of 3D. Although it's a dying technique now, which I mostly blame distributors for in terms of abusing it and making cheap knockoffs, Lee took his time and found really clever ways to implement 3D, not as a gimmick, but rather to complement film as an art form, which is how it's supposed to be used. In the case of Life of Pi, an adaptation of a book that the first time around I thought was okay, the second time around I thought was kind of tedious, this is used to bring the movie to life, but sometimes goes a bit over the deep end. Whereas I found the visuals for this film absolutely gorgeous with breathtaking cinematography, Life of Pi's target audience seems to range all over the place. Similar to the book, it's covering very adult themes, yet throughout the film there are moments that implement a sort of whimsical motif to the matter. In all honesty, it would have benefited from tackling this head-on instead of just skirting around the edges throughout and adding a unneeded exposition moment to a kind of abrupt conclusion. Life of Pi has much to say and plenty of replay value, but not without some rather noticeable flaws, and I give it a B.
And you're the only one of us that's read the book, I believe. Joe, you've never read it, right?
Wanted to, but never did.
Yeah, I've heard very mixed things about the book. People are pretty divided on that. But when you read it, Justin, was the film already in the works, or you read it before?
I believe when I got around to reading it, it was just announced.
Okay. Is that why you read it? Because you
No, actually.
Okay.
No, my grandparents are librarians, and they gave it to me and said, you should totally check this out.
So as you were reading it, did you think, like, oh, well, how are they going to make this into a movie?
Not really. I actually thought it would be great, and I thought it would be relatively easy to pull off, provided they got the right people. I wasn't expecting the CGI and cinematography that the final product was gunning for, but clearly, in terms of visual effects,
Yeah, the visuals are
They
great.
did that with a vengeance.
To be honest, I think the movie is actually a little divisive from what I've heard.
To some extent.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I don't know if it's, like, hated, but there are different opinions on it. I know you and I have talked about it before, Justin, well before the show. And how do you guys feel about, like, some of the kind of on-the-nose symbolism? Because some of those things kind of bugged me a bit. Mm-hmm. Like, they come to the island, it's in the shape of Vishnu or whatever. Like, I always hated that. Like,
yeah, I mean,
do you think it kind of like we said, it's bashing a message over the audience's head,
right?
But we're still not entirely sure what it is. So,
right,
it's both a little overdone and underdone at the same time.
It's part of the reason why I don't think they should have been rated PG and they should have gone for a PG-13 rating, because I feel like they're trying to make this sort of it's a movie for everyone, and it's not.
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily spoilers. I don't think it is, but I've always thought the movie was like really focusing on kind of the bleakness and the purpose of faith, but not necessarily the accuracy of it. And like by the end of the movie, I always thought it was kind of like it doesn't necessarily matter what the answer is. You just what you choose to believe to help get you through your day, if that's accurate. Because I don't know, but they have to avoid certain things like deaths of people in the movie. But they show deaths, but they don't exactly tell you how it goes, and you learn different stories, different versions, and so you feel like they shouldn't have danced around those issues. They should have just said, "Hey, show us this."
Get into the nitty gritty. I don't think that because you're painting this wild, gorgeous, fantastical interpretation doesn't mean that the actual dark reality doesn't have some ground in faith.
But we've seen that a lot in like a lot of family movies, like some of the most famous Disney ones, like Lion King, for instance, is a good example. I believe that was PG.
That was G.
That was G, and they had straight up death. They didn't even dance around it. Like they showed us what happened.
I don't think this is necessarily a sugar-coated story. Now, granted, I didn't read the book, so I don't know, how graphic it gets in the detail of things.
But pretty toned down.
Well, but I think thematically
it's okay. I mean, I didn't think that we needed to necessarily see the tiger ripping animals apart and other certain things.
I think especially with the ending, I think thematically it's very dark, even for me.
I'm not denying that there's a dark undertone. I'm just saying I feel like for a story like this, you can't just dance around the edges.
But in what ways do you think they do that? Because I felt like by the end, they pretty much straight up tell you.
Mm-hmm. And that's just it. They tell you. They don't offer any sort of like subtext. They don't bring you into that story. It's just simply, this is the better story. Take this. Here's what actually happened. We don't care.
I don't know. I thought the way they did it stylistically, they kind of reveal something about the whole journey. But I thought the way they did it was so deadpan, so pseudo-realistic. It was complete contrast to everything we saw before. No grandness, no mysticism, no CGI, no visuals even. It's all hearsay. So you could say that was more of a story rather than what we saw, which was the truth. So I thought stylistically that's why they chose to do it that way, to have more of an impact. It impacted me the first time I saw it because it was like, wow. So that's how it is. No gusto. This is literally from the guy's mouth. Boom.
Which I get. I just don't necessarily think it's a fair treatment. Obviously, that's a divisive statement.
I think that's probably one of the biggest parts for the movie is the ending. I think what it's trying to say and how it says it is really open.
Well, and that's apparently how this story was told to the author of the book. The writer that he's talking to, the adult pie, that's supposed to be Jan Martel, who wrote the book. So, I mean, maybe this is how things actually went down, and this is what he was told by whoever. I don't know, but
I don't know. I like the ending did always makes me think. Like I'm not entirely sure how to take it, but I like it in some ways, in other ways I don't. So it always makes me think. I definitely don't think it's a perfect movie, but there are still some pretty strong things about it. But
there's a lot to admire about it. It's just not without a lot of flaws.
I think it's just one of those cases where depending on how much you dislike the flaws, it might impact how you feel about it. Like I can't really argue with your B because if that bothered you more, I can understand that. In all honesty, I can understand that.
Well, our next movie is The Departed. Joe brought us that one for Old Classic, and let's hear about it.
All right. Well, this is where I tell you about it.
One of the few triple features where every movie's an Oscar winner.
I'll bring that up. The Departed is a 2006 American crime drama directed by Martin Scorsese and written by William Monahan. It is a remake of the 2002 Hong Kong film Infernal Affairs. The film stars Leonardo DiCaprio, Matt Damon, Jack Nicholson, and Mark Wahlberg, with Martin Sheen, Vera Farmiga, and Alec Baldwin in supporting roles. It won several awards, including 4 Oscars at the 79th Academy Awards: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay, and Best Film Editing. Wahlberg was nominated for Best Supporting Actor. The film takes place in Boston, and Irish mob boss Francis Frank Costello plants Colin Sullivan as a mole within the Massachusetts State Police, with 2 characters loosely based on the famous gangster Whitey Bulger and the corrupt FBI agent John Connolly, who grew up with him in Boston. Simultaneously, the police assign undercover trooper William Billy Costigan, played by DiCaprio, to infiltrate Costello's crew. When both sides realize the situation, each man attempts to discover the other's true identity before his own cover is blown. This is one of the best Scorsese pictures in recent years. The director uses the template to create a gripping thriller that is well paced and edited despite a rather lengthy runtime. For me, the best aspect, though, really is the cast. Everyone here works well for the duration of their screen time that is given to them. In particular, I think DiCaprio and Damon stand out the most as leading these films, with similar backgrounds, but with very different paths for their characters. It's a bit bleak, perhaps, for some audience members, but I still feel that the ending is extremely satisfactory, and I give it an A+.
Justin, what do you think of The Departed?
Scorsese has made a variety of great movies, spanning a number of different genres, that have been nominated for Best Picture in the Academy Awards. How The Departed managed to be the one to take it home is beyond me. Admittedly, the acting is for the most part decent, though much of the ensemble goes a bit too hard on the Boston accents, heading into stereotype territory. The fact that this movie essentially crams plot points from the Infernal Affairs trilogy into one movie becomes rather noticeable. As a result, The Departed is very sporadic, sometimes going into territories that are really interesting, and other times just feel like material that has been seen in much better Scorsese films like Goodfellas. The acting and cinematography, for the most part, keep it moving, but eventually the length does get felt, and it definitely suffers for it. The Departed is a good film with some strong performances from the cast that has gotten slightly better upon a repeat viewing, but whether or not it deserves all the credit it's been given, I find debatable, and I give it a B+.
What was your original grade on it?
B.
Okay. Well, this was the first time for me. So, Joe, I'm glad you brought it to our old classic. I was working at Hollywood Video when this was released, and some horrible customer ruined the ending for me, so I just was soured on watching it. Even still, people have told me for years, even though I know how it ends, I needed to see it. Since doing the show, I've watched several Scorsese films that I'd never seen before, and this one lived up to its reputation the most, I would say. It's got top-notch storytelling and great acting from most of the leads. I will admit, Justin Baldwin does seem a little bit out of place here with the rest of the greats. Wahlberg also is clearly only starting to show his potential here. I'm not sure I would have awarded him the acting nomination over DiCaprio or Damon, like you mentioned, or obviously Jack Nicholson gives a great performance as well.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm getting off track. The only real problem I have with it is, quite surprisingly, it's one of Scorsese's most erratic directing efforts. I honestly cannot believe that this is the one he won Best Director for. Best Picture, okay. But his attempts here at these experimental shots, for some of it, really threw me off. He has, like, swooping cameras. He had that one, like, James Bond-ish opening shot that was weird. You know, obviously, that was, to me, lip service, you know, from the Academy for years of being overlooked. But for Best Picture, I can see that. Overall, The Departed was a pleasure to finally experience, and I give it an A. Now, Justin, I do have to say, because you had mentioned when it started that it takes these three different stories, but even after you said that while watching it, I really thought it was a very cohesive story. I didn't notice, you know, like if you asked me to point out the three different storylines, I couldn't, to be honest. I really think it flows very well.
Like, I believe you. I mean, I haven't seen those films, so there's probably a lot there that was obviously fleshed out more, but for what it is, I thought that it was very fluid.
I mean, the trilogy has its own set of flaws as well, but it's just like The Departed takes elements of all three movies, which, first of all, I don't like at all, because it's like, why not just take your own spin on Americanization of the trilogy if you're going to do that? All three were, I believe, a pretty big hit in China. However, Scorsese just thinks gigantic super film, and all these little moments are really big plot details in the movies themselves. Each movie in the original series, I believe, was like around 2 hours, 2:10 max, I think. Mm-hmm. And you can get a lot more plot points from that. Instead, The Departed's like, okay, little snippet here, little snippet there. You basically made a Franken movie.
But as somebody, what I'm saying is, as somebody that doesn't know anything about that, I didn't notice that it was disjointed at all. I thought it flowed very well together. You know, so I mean, that was just my take on it. I don't doubt you that that's what he did, but I'm saying if he did that, it was well done.
I don't know. I thought it was very sporadic and stop and start because of that. Like,
Okay.
some of the elements are interesting, but it's like, hey, there's this plot point. Now we're going to focus on 3 other things. Then we're going to come back to that.
There are a lot of plot points there, obviously, they do focus on, but it really keeps the film moving.
Like, Jack Nicholson's probably my favorite part about the Departed as a collective whole.
You want to know something?
Go on.
He's actually my least favorite part.
Interesting. Go on.
Like he's very well done, but he's once again kind of playing an element of Jack Nicholson. Interestingly, he is basing his character off of a real life person, which is another element that was added into this movie that I think separates it from Infernal Affairs. I feel like his acting was not as good as Damon's or DiCaprio's. Like, for me, they stand out the most, and just their conflicting
Well, and that's
characters.
the best storyline, too.
Damon I also thought was going way too crazy with the Boston accent, but
I mean, I guess maybe the Boston accent, personally, I've heard much
like
worse.
if you're from Boston, you can kind of do what you want with it.
I know Wahlberg, I mean...
Wahlberg, yeah.
You know,
speaking of going overboard, but
it's his...
These people are from Boston. I think he's just using his regular accent.
I always thought they were just trying to make it as, authentic as possible.
Yeah.
Nicholson didn't have much of an accent. He just kind of, he did the a couple times.
I would say the weirdest accent in the movie was Martin Sheen's. He was the most kind of in and out with it.
Yeah, but he was barely there, so...
Yeah.
But, no, for me, I just felt like their performances were better. He was an interesting character, to be sure, but I felt that DiCaprio's storyline and Damon's storyline was definitely the most defined and interesting, both written and performance-wise. So, between the 3 big names, Nicholson's probably my least favorite, actually. Though, they are pretty much neck and neck, though. So, it's like me, we're talking inches of difference here. It's still a great Jack Nicholson performance among the many.
As such, though, Joe, are you also surprised that Wahlberg was the one that got nominated from this movie?
I like him a lot in this movie. I think has some great lines, and I like his character. But I don't think it's really different than anything he did before. Like he's played like tough cops and gangsters from Boston, in a dozen movies before this one. That was kind of his thing when he was trying to break out and do different things before Miracle and whatnot.
Right.
So no, I think that is a bit strange. Once again, just give DiCaprio the award.
This would have definitely been the one to do it too.
A great DiCaprio. So I don't really get it. Honestly, I think Wahlberg's gotten better since this movie.
I do too.
So I don't really get that.
I think this is, as I said in my review, sort of shades of what is to come from Wahlberg, but I don't think this is quite Oscar-worthy performance.
No. I'm not quite sure where they're going with that.
Yeah, it's a little weird.
It was a little odd. I don't know what to tell you there, honestly. But yeah.
What do you think about the directing?
It's funny, because the directing and the editing are like some of the things that this movie is best known for. I liked a lot of the editing and the directing in terms of most of the shots. I thought it was pretty good. There are some weird things, though. Like the James Bond circle thing comes back to a couple times.
What was that?
That was really random and out of place. There were a couple shots, like at the very end of the movie, there's a scene that's pretty on the nose. With
the rat.
I'll be honest, I did not notice before. Honestly,
really?
I never even really thought about it. It was pretty on the nose. But
yeah.
My eyes weren't diverted to it, I guess. I don't think it's Scorsese's best movie, but I think it's one of his best movies.
Okay.
So, I'm pretty okay with it for the most part.
Well, our final movie of the show is Anne of the Thousand Days. This is a 1969 costume drama nominated for 10 Oscars. It won only one, appropriately enough, Best Costume Design, but was nominated for 3 acting awards, Adapted Screenplay, Best Picture, and 4 other technical awards, Art Direction, Cinematography, Music, and Sound. And Justin's going to tell us about it.
King Henry VIII, played by Richard Burton, has been desperately trying for a male heir and growing increasingly impatient with his wife, Queen Catherine, played by Irene Pappas, while turning his attention to the young Anne Boleyn, played by Genevieve Bujold. In Henry's attempts to be rid of Catherine and marry Anne, who promises to bear his son, a line begins to merge between where the power in the monarchy ends and the church begins. The brilliance of classic cinema for me personally lies in how much filmmakers would pay respects to theater and find new ways to go above and beyond the medium. Anne of the Thousand Days certainly could have been a hokey melodrama had it not been for some truly fantastic performances and gorgeous use of Technicolor. Burton and Bujold are incredibly talented in their roles, and while their characters are sometimes a little too rooted in Old English, nothing takes more than a few moments to decipher. That's not to say that the film doesn't have some soap opera-esque moments. It does, but with actors of this caliber at the ready, much of this can be overlooked and keep the film's epic running time go mostly unnoticed. However, what really makes Anne so impressive is how it implements editing to accentuate narrative cues. These lend themselves to interesting jump cut transitions that never feel episodic but instead give the film a well-rounded feel to it, bringing us deeper into the story and seeing the action from a number of different angles. I won't say that Anne of the Thousand Days is 100% perfect, but it definitely deserves the nominations it received, and I give it an A-.
Joe, what'd you think?
I have to say that I think this movie really took a lot of leaps in terms of experimentation. I mean, really, just in terms of the costuming, obviously, really gorgeous. Use of Technicolor was good. There were some really great shots here and editing, as Justin pointed out. The performances were mostly fantastic. And being a fan of this period, like the whole Renaissance, medieval Europe, particularly England around this time, I've always been interested in that stuff. And this movie is pretty historically accurate from what I've read. And I'm a big fan of the show The Tudors. And from that, the section involving the Boleyn storyline, they obviously must have taken some notes from this movie. So they really, really good job here. I think they kept the characters fairly dynamic despite some of the melodrama. And even though it was rather long, I felt that it was very fluid. I actually really enjoyed it. I thought it was a pretty fantastic film. I actually give it an A.
Wow. Well, Joe, you and I differ on this. I typically don't like movies set in this era, the royalty and the spectacle. So the fact that this one held my interest for 2.5 hours speaks to just how well it is done. All the technical awards it got nominated for are worthy. Obviously, the costumes are great, but the set design and the music really is, it punches up the scenes.
Oh, even those trumpets.
Yeah, actually, more jazz trumpets. But it really is the performances and the solid script that make this one a winner. Burton is probably best as King Henry VIII, but Bujold as the title character is possibly just as compelling. It is a little bit too long, but any film of the era, the 60s and 70s set in this time period is going to be. So I can't really take off too much for that. I give it a B+. I actually, for me, enjoyed it a lot.
I will say, I believe it was Anthony Quayle got the supporting actor nomination. I like him because he's actually, this was a big surprise to me because he plays Baltar, Count Baltar on the original Battlestar Galactica, had some roles on Star Trek. So I've mostly seen him on sci-fi television. I did not know that he was a fairly big film actor around the time.
Yeah, I guess dramatic-wise.
Preceding that. And
theater background, maybe?
Maybe. I honestly don't know, but he is good at playing a different kind of character. But I have to confess, I didn't know if he was really nomination worthy, though.
Yeah, I didn't.
I thought his character was even barely in the movie.
Right.
He comes in spurts.
I thought he was good, don't get me wrong, but I mean, I don't think it was as memorable as like Baltar.
Yeah, honestly, I thought he was fairly forgettable. If Joe didn't keep pointing out that that's who he was, I don't think I would have remembered him as a character that much.
It falls in that kind of like small but sort of memorable character to an extent.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't on the memorable end for me.
That stood out to me. So I was like waiting for him to like have some great scene that would make him stand out. I'm like, he's there. He's doing stuff. He's okay, but I felt like the two leads were much better. So
yeah, that's for sure. This is probably the first Burton movie I've ever seen.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I mean, for me as well.
I know him largely as Elizabeth Taylor's ex-husband.
Yeah.
More than anything. I mean, I knew he was an actor back in the day, but
I think I've seen
not of this caliber.
One or two of his movies before. From what I've seen, he's always good. He's always fun. This is actually probably one of the more serious roles I've seen him in, though. He usually is playing a character that has a little more fun.
Okay.
It's weird. It's weird. I don't know.
Yeah.
So he definitely has some range, and he's got a very powerful presence.
Yeah, and he did a great job here. All right, well, that is going to wrap up the show for this week. Joe, what's new on the Merlin channel?
The most recent things I did, I was tagged in a little tag for apparently singing the Pokemon theme song. So
really
did a live performance of that.
Cool.
Oh my word!
Apparently, and then I also did my own review with Indigo, my girlfriend, for the Mockingjay movie. So
cool.
Little in car for both of us.
Okay.
So she liked it a lot more than I did.
Really?
But then again, she's a big fan of the book. So
okay.
Surprise.
Well, I'll check that out. And for those of you listening, we do have our listener's choice coming up. So you can get us your picks for that. And you can do that any of the following ways. You can join us on the Facebook group, which is Film Fanatics with an exclamation point. You can tweet us, which is at Film Fanatics Pod. You can comment right here on this YouTube channel. And, of course, if you have not subscribed yet to our channel, you can go ahead and do that. And we'd love to have you aboard. That is going to do it for the show this week. We will see you back here next week. Thanks so much for listening. Bye!